Okay. Alright. Today's going to be a continuation of the last one where I was practicing with the paint knife. This time I'm going to try to do the entire painting with just the paint knife. The theme is a snowy mountain, and it's going to be hue shifted for orange so that it's like a snowy morning. Today's going to be different because unlike most of them, it's going to be practice, and I'm not going to do a sketch. I'm just going to start painting and feel it out as I go. As you can see, I'm testing out different swatches, and this is going to be probably the longest part, is getting the color. But once I get that, the rest of it's like really quick. I'm starting with the sky, and then the color I go for the sky is going to be the same color I use for the shades. It's going to be a sort of light blue that's going to be more muted by red and orange. Because it's an experiment, I'm trying to keep it as close to the actual reference I was going off of, so the sky is going to be fairly smooth compared to what I normally do, where I try to get it to swirly like Van Gogh. To get the sky to be kind of flat like the reference I was using, I learned to kind of spread the paint the same way you would shade with graphite, where you go one direction, cross a different direction, and try not to keep it directly perpendicular. Try to keep it slightly acute in the angle. Luckily, the shape of the knife helped keep it fairly clean on the corners and on the crests of the mountains. I find my usual method a bit more fun, but it works all the same. Before I moved on and started a different color, I did the shading of the mountain that I was talking about earlier. I kept it generally the same blue, I just tinted it down a bit more with some orange. This part went by fairly quickly because I was just getting the general form, and I was going to perfect it later after I added the highlights with the orange and the whites. I tested on a swatch, but it didn't end up being the same color as I wanted because I didn't compare it to the blue I was working with. So I tried the first bit, then I decided to deepen it with more orange. That was generally getting to the right color, but it still wasn't getting to the snowy look that I was going for. I figured what I needed to do was blend it in better and find a highlight to work it. Acrylic is surprisingly not that easy to mix by accident, so I had to purposefully mix in some of the blue and orange to get it to be blended. This lended itself really well to lead into the highlights, and I feel like that brought out more of the snowy look. Adding the highlights pulled away from the shadows, so I had to bring some of the shadows back toward the bottom to try to fill out the empty space. I decided to add more vibrance to the shadows where the sun was hitting. This was bringing out the shape that I was trying to go for, but it still wasn't looking like a snowy mountain. I had to toy around with highlights, and even though you would think that you wanted to add more and more highlights, sometimes deepening the shadows brings out the color more. This is what I meant by it being an experiment, because I'm not used to doing the true creative, which is creating something mostly based out of your mind, and also trying to use the paint knife, which I still am getting used to. Before editing this, I did experiment more in a stream that is never going to see the light of day because it ended up really horrible. Long story short, I think I learned that acrylic doesn't really work with a paint knife as oil does. But back to the painting, I was adding more shadows to get it to be more of a stark difference, thinking that that would make it better. I was slightly wrong. I think it actually looked better without them, but that's okay. I started blending them in later. Adding a pale yellow served to increase the contrast. I was trying to pull down with the paint knife to try to keep it feeling the gravity and make it seem more heavy, like a mountain should be. Adding more deep blue brought up more shading and made it to feel a little bit more like it was supposed to, and I feel like that was doing the most service to the painting. The shape was really starting to come together, and I was moving a bit more quickly, trying to get it to be more consistent throughout, because at this point the right side was feeling more heavy, so I had to kind of level it out. There was something still missing in it, and I wasn't quite sure what it was, so I was taking a while to look it over and figure out what could be missing. Now it was a bunch more touch-ups and blending, trying to make sure I got it as proper as possible. Then to add more vibrance to it, I used a more rich orange to try to deepen some of the corners of it without quite blending it to blue. Some of it overlapped, and I was trying to keep it to still look snowy while still getting the morning glow. One of the struggles here was every single paint I was using was wet, so even though I was having trouble blending it earlier, now I couldn't stop it from blending. This whole painting so far has been a huge lesson as to acrylic really is best to do with a brush. So this was leaving some space for some deepening shadows, and I added some more close to black to add some contrast. In summary, the lesson of this is, while the paint knife is a very useful tool for mixing and for putting on a large amount of paint, it is still nothing compared to a brush, so I reverted back to a brush. As experimental as this was, it still was very important for me to have it look good in the end. This is one of my shorter pieces. It didn't take so long to do. I feel like it could have used more in hindsight, but I still can't figure out what I could have done with the paint knife to improve it. I think it just came to the brush. But that aside, thank you for watching.